In Hungry Ghosts, investigative journalist Joe Fisher examines the phenomenon of channeling and the spirit world. He discusses the origins.
Well, the earliest recorded information that we have is really with the ancient Greeks and the Greek oracles, when priestesses would be dressed in white and would go into a trance and bring through voices and prophecies to the assembled gathering. Channeling has been known by a number of different names in different cultures over the centuries, but it next rears its head in a major way with the Victorians in the last century.
Alexander Blair Ewart, editor of Dimensions magazine, has studied the resurgence of channeling and its pagan beginnings.
Trance-channeling basically emerged in the mid-1800s when science had destroyed Western religion, essentially. Something that had been repressed for about 2,000 years, which was paganism, and earlier atavistic forms of religion came gushing to the surface. So suddenly you had this pagan approach to the spirit that had been repressed for a couple of thousand years, and it suddenly floated to the surface.
When mediums would sit in a seance and sit among people who came into this seance room to listen to the words of the entities who were speaking through the medium, and these entities were often Chinese and Red Indian guides. Why they prevailed, we don't know, but often the guides who spoke through, and I use the word guides in quotes, the entities who came through were often Red Indian and Chinese, and would make pronouncements about the lives of the sitters in that room, would tell them much about themselves, would be able to speak clairvoyantly about the people who are gathered around the medium. And the medium would be insensible, would be often sitting back with their eyes closed, and would just pronounce in a monotone voices. And the voices would often change as different entities would come through.
It seems that mostly people are using channeling at this stage in less of a 19th century way, where you went to get a message from your Auntie Mary who'd, passed over 10 years ago, and where the messages were very much in terms of the medium coming through and saying, I've got your Auntie Mary here and here's some advice. Now people seem to be drawing on channeling from the point of view of saying, which is why ultimately I don't think channeling is dangerous, because the way that the individual interacts with it is, and I've done a lot of research, talked to hundreds and hundreds of people, they tend to say, well, I get this kind of information from the channeled entity. I take from it what I want to use. I take from it what I feel comfortable with, and I try to develop myself spiritually through that.
I think that channeling is part of the end result of the me generation. It's people looking to see how much they can personalize themselves, how much they can get into their own things, how much they can, well, get their own goodies, and here's another goodie they can get. But that's only a small part of it. I think a larger part of it is that you're finding in our society today a tremendous fear and anxiety and a need for some kind of authority which will give people direction.
What has drawn me to channeling is that in religious structures, they're precisely that, they're a structure. And if you're looking for a sense of security and conformity, then you go and you find their answers. But channeling is a way that helps you find your own answers. And it makes your life far more meaningful. You're not dependent on someone to tell you who you are, what you should do.
We are a culture which is now what I would call rejecting many of the assumptions that we've lived with for the past 300 years. For example, the assumption that the rational is the only way of knowing truth. And so you have that being in some ways pushed aside, and people saying, no, that there are many other ways of finding truth. And one of those ways of finding truth is to connect with another reality, a spirit reality or a spiritual reality. And so there's a searching after that.
Traditional religion never did it for me. external authority never did it for me. I always felt there was something inside there that needed to come up to the surface. So I studied altered states of consciousness. One day a friend was leading me through a meditation, and I sensed an energy in the room. And to make a long story short, the energy was very loving, very benevolent, and I got a sense that it wanted to drop in to my body.
And this is really an introduction of what we would call a neo-paganism. It's a reintroduction into the West of beliefs that have been around for thousands upon thousands of years, that there are in fact spiritual entities and spiritual realities both in nature and outside of nature, and we can contact them. So I think all of that comes together at a time when people are very insecure, they're searching for direction, they want answers, they want certainty, but they feel all the old ways of giving answers are not appropriate. And so there are certain groups of people who are now wanting to tune in to spirits that can give them help and can give them direction.